The marriage bones clacked against each other as the elder shook them in her gnarled hands. Each hollow strike echoed in Era's chest like the death knell of her future. She knelt on the packed earth of the ceremonial cave, the flickering firelight painting monstrous shadows on the walls, decorated with ochre handprints of ancestors long dead. The tribe had gathered in a tight circle, their faces unreadable in the dim light. Yet she felt their stares like physical touch, some pitying, others curious, a few gleeful at her downfall. The daughter of Chief Ragnar will be joined with Korak the outcast before the next full moon, announced Mara, the elder, her voice cracking with age but firm with authority. A collective gasp rippled through the gathering. Someone whispered, "The Exile? The one who—" Before being silenced by a sharp glance from Ragnar, Era's eyes shot up to her father's face. The chief stood tall, his broad shoulders squared beneath his bearskin mantle, his expression carved from the same stone as the mountains that surrounded their valley. In his eyes, she searched for some hint of love, some flicker of regret, but found only cold determination. "Father," she whispered, the word catching in her throat like a fishbone. Ragnar did not look at her. "It is decided," he announced to the tribe. "My daughter has shown disrespect to me and to our ways. She has questioned the hunt. She has spoken out of turn in council. She has refused 3 worthy men of our tribe. Now she will learn humility with one who knows shame." Era's fingers dug into the soft deerskin of her tunic. The insult was deliberate, calculated. Korak the outcast. The man who had been driven from the protection of the tribe 5 winters ago, who lived alone in the shadows of the forest, permitted to exist only at the edges of their world, denied fire, denied shelter, denied communion. The man whose name had become a warning whispered to disobedient children. And now, her husband. A strong hand gripped her arm, pulling her to her feet. Her mother's sister, Luda, leaned close to her ear. "Do not show weakness now," she hissed. "The tribe watches." Pride was all Era had left. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and met the eyes of those around her. She was the daughter of the chief, a woman who could read the weather in the flight of birds, who knew which plants healed and which killed, who had survived 17 winters in this merciless land. She would not break before them. But when the crowd parted and Korak entered the cave, her resolve nearly shattered. He moved like a predator, silent and watchful, his body lean and hard from years of solitary survival. Dirt and old scars marked his skin. His dark hair hung in matted tangles past his shoulders. But it was his eyes that stole Era's breath, pale as winter ice, and just as devoid of warmth. They passed over the assembled tribe without recognition until they found her. In that moment, as their gazes locked, Era felt something pass between them. Not connection, but recognition. Here was another soul who understood what it meant to be alone while surrounded by your people. "Do you accept this union, Korak the outcast?" Mara asked, her ceremonial bones still clutched in her hand. For several heartbeats he said nothing, his ice-pale eyes never leaving Era's face. Then, in a voice roughened by disuse, "What choice does an outcast have?" Ragnar stepped forward, towering over the exile. "You have the choice to refuse and return to your solitude, forever." A muscle twitched in Korak's jaw. "And what of your daughter's choice?" The cave fell silent. No one had ever dared question the chief so directly. Ragnar's hand moved to the bone knife at his belt. "My daughter obeys her chief and her father." Korak held the chief's gaze for a moment longer than was safe, then inclined his head in a gesture that might have been submission or might have been mockery. "Then I accept." Mara approached Era, pressing the marriage bones into her trembling hands. "And you, daughter of Ragnar?" The bones felt like ice against her palm. She looked up at her father, at the man who had once carried her on his shoulders and taught her to track deer through the forest. The man who now offered her to an exile like a piece of discarded meat. "I accept," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "But remember this day, Father. Remember what you have done." The winter had been cruel even by the standards of their harsh land. 3 moons had passed since the first snow fell, burying the valley in white silence. The great glaciers to the north had crept closer with each passing season, pushing the mammoth herd southward and forcing rival tribes into their hunting grounds. The world was changing, growing colder, and the elders whispered that the spirits were displeased. The people of the Red Deer, as Era's tribe called themselves, had survived for countless generations in this valley, sheltered by the embrace of ancient mountains. Their cave dwellings, carved into the limestone cliffs, offered protection from both weather and predators. Below, the frozen river wound like a serpent through the snow-covered plain, where, in summer, deer and aurochs would graze. Now the hunting parties had to venture farther each time, often returning with little more than rabbits and the occasional fox. Food was scarce, tempers shorter. The tribe's 43 members huddled together in the great cave at night, sharing warmth and stories to keep despair at bay. Children grew thin, and 2 elders had already passed to the spirit world since the solstice. In such times, the tribe looked to their chief for strength and to the traditions that had sustained them through countless winters. Their society was ordered like the seasons themselves. The chief, the hunters, the toolmakers, the healers, each with their place, their duties, their honor. The circle of life, the elders taught, depended on each person following the path set by the ancestors. To question was to invite chaos. To break tradition was to endanger everyone, and no tradition was more sacred than marriage. The binding of families, the securing of alliances, the continuation of bloodlines. Children born of strong unions ensured the tribe's future. A chief's daughter was a precious gift to be given to the most worthy hunter, the most skilled warrior, the man who would strengthen the tribe with his blood and his deeds. Instead, Ragnar had thrown his daughter to the outcast. The ceremony would take place at the sacred pool, a thermal spring that never froze, even in deepest winter. Steam rose from its mineral-rich waters day and night, creating a perpetual mist that the people believed connected the world of the living to the realm of spirits. It was here that all important rituals occurred: birth celebrations, coming-of-age ceremonies, marriage unions, and death rites. For 5 days following the announcement, Era was kept in seclusion in the women's cave. Her aunts and cousins painted her body with ochre symbols of fertility and protection. They wove beads of amber and shell into her hair. They sang the ancient songs and told her what to expect from a man's body, though none could tell her what to expect from the outcast. They avoided her eyes when she asked what Korak had done to deserve exile. "Some things are not spoken of," her mother's sister finally told her. "It is enough to know that he broke the most sacred law." Meanwhile, Korak was permitted to approach the outskirts of the camp for the first time in 5 years. He was given a new spear and allowed to bathe in the icy river, though not the sacred pool. The men watched him warily, hands never far from their weapons. No one spoke to him except to give instructions. No one offered to help him prepare for the ceremony. The world beyond the valley remained largely unknown to the people. Occasionally, traders from distant tribes would arrive with exotic shells, strange-colored stones, or new kinds of flint for tool-making. They brought stories of great waters filled with salt, of plains so vast a person could walk for a moon without seeing mountains, of other peoples with different ways and different gods. The elders listened politely but regarded such tales with suspicion. The valley was their world, the mountains their guardians, the cave walls their history books, painted with the deeds of ancestors and the animals that sustained them. Into this insular world, Korak had once brought change. Before his exile, he had been a hunter of great skill but unusual methods. He had traveled beyond the mountains and returned with knowledge that challenged the elders' teachings. Some had listened eagerly, others had seen danger in his ideas. But none had expected what eventually led to his banishment, a crime so terrible that even 5 winters later, the tribe averted their eyes when speaking of it. And now, as the marriage day dawned cold and clear, 2 lives shaped by this unforgiving world would be forced together, the chief's daughter and the man her people had cast out. Both victims of tradition, both pawns in a game played by powers they couldn't fully comprehend, both about to discover that even in a world bound by ancient laws, hearts followed their own path. Ira sat alone by the women's fire, her fingers mechanically stripping the bark from a willow branch. Tomorrow she would belong to Korak. Tonight was her last, as her father's daughter, as a respected member of the tribe. Tomorrow she would become something else, not quite outcast herself, but tainted by association, a living reminder of her father's displeasure. At 17 winters, Ira had already lived longer than many. She had survived 2 devastating fevers, a wolf attack that left 3 pale scars across her right shoulder, and the great hunger 2 winters past when half the children and elders had perished. She was neither the most beautiful woman of the tribe nor the most skilled at the women's crafts of weaving and pottery. But she possessed something rarer, a keen mind and an unflinching gaze that saw beyond the surface of things. As a child, she had followed the tribe's healer, old Nima, absorbing knowledge of plants and their properties, learning to set broken bones and staunch wounds. When Nima died last spring, many expected Ira to take her place. Instead, Ragnar had appointed Nima's cousin, a woman who deferred to his authority without question. Ira's knowledge remained hers alone, neither recognized nor denied, existing in the shadows like so much else in her life. "You think too much," her mother had often told her before succumbing to the wasting sickness 3 winters ago. A woman should know her place, but Ira could not help but question. When the hunters claimed that the mammoths were becoming scarce because the spirits were angered, she had suggested that perhaps too many were being killed without need. When the Council of Elders decreed that a child with a twisted foot should be left on the mountainside, she had argued for its life. When 3 hunters had sought her hand in marriage, all older men, all close allies of her father, she had refused them all, knowing they wanted only the prestige of being the chief's son by marriage. Each defiance had been noted, each challenge remembered, until finally Ragnar had found the perfect punishment. A daughter who would not honor him would be given to a man whom no one honored. Across the camp, beyond the main fire where the tribe gathered for the evening meal, Korak knelt alone at the edge of the light. Custom forbade him from sharing the tribe's fire until after the union ceremony. He had built his own small flame, carefully tending it with the reverence of a man who had been denied fire's comfort for too long. 5 years of exile had changed him. Once, he had been among the most promising young hunters, admired for his skill with a spear and his uncanny ability to predict the movement of game. His laugh had been frequent, his stories welcome around the fire. He had friends, family, a place in the world. That was before the incident at the Cave of Ancestors, before the accusations, the trial, the sentence that had stripped him of everything but his life. Survival alone in the wilderness required a different kind of strength than living within the tribe. Korak had learned to move silently through the forest, to sleep in trees when predators prowled below, to eat things that others would consider unfit for consumption. He had learned that loneliness could kill as surely as cold or hunger if you let it sink too deeply into your bones. What he hadn't learned was forgiveness. The injustice of his punishment still burned in him, a fire hotter than any he could build with flint and tinder. He knew why Ragnar had offered him this marriage, not as mercy, but as a final humiliation for both him and the chief's troublesome daughter. Yet he had accepted, because after 5 years of speaking only to the wind and stars, after 5 years of watching the tribe's fires from a distance, after 5 years of being less than human in the eyes of his people, even this mockery of belonging called to him like water to a man dying of thirst. But acceptance didn't mean surrender. Korak had plans of his own, plans that had been forming since the day of his exile, plans that this unexpected marriage might actually help bring to fruition. If the chief thought him broken, subdued by years of solitude, he would soon learn otherwise. As darkness fell completely, Ira looked across the camp and found Korak's eyes already on her, reflective as a wolf's in the firelight. Neither looked away. In that sustained gaze, something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits, both outsiders in their own way, both with secrets, both with something to prove. Later that night, as Era lay sleepless in the women's cave, an unexpected visitor slipped past the drowsing attendants who were supposed to guard her purity until the ceremony. Mara, the old bone keeper who had announced the marriage, crouched beside her sleeping platform. "Child," she whispered, her breath smelling of herbs and age, "there's something you must know before tomorrow." Ira sat up, instantly alert. "What is it?" "The outcast Korak. The story of his crime is not as you've been told." The old woman's eyes darted nervously toward the cave entrance. "Your father." A noise from the entrance silenced her. One of the attendants stirred, mumbling in her sleep. Mara pressed something small and hard into Era's palm, a carved piece of bone, then melted back into the shadows without another word. Across the settlement, Korak received his own visitor. Not someone from the tribe none would risk being seen speaking with the outcast, but a stranger. A man with markings Korak recognized from his travels beyond the mountains. The man spoke in a different dialect, but Korak understood enough. "They come with the next moon," the stranger whispered. "Many warriors. They have not forgotten what was stolen." Korak nodded grimly. "I have not forgotten either." The stranger disappeared into the night, leaving Korak alone with knowledge that could either save the tribe or destroy it. Knowledge that made his impending marriage to the chief's daughter both more complicated and more necessary than anyone could imagine. As dawn approached, both Ira and Korak faced the coming day with dread and determination. Both carried secrets. Both nursed wounds inflicted by the same hand. Both stood at the edge of a precipice, unsure whether the forced union would lead to destruction or to something neither dared hope for redemption. The marriage ceremony at the sacred pool was brief and joyless. No songs were sung celebrating the union. No feast had been prepared. The customary gifts exchanged between families were absent. Korak had no family present, and Ragnar had made it clear that his daughter was gift enough for an outcast. Era stood before the tribe in her ceremonial dress of soft deerskin, adorned with beads and porcupine quills, her face painted with the red ochre of a bride. Korak wore only what he had been given the day before, a simple tunic of rough woven fiber, undecorated save for the obligatory symbols of marriage hastily drawn on the chest with charcoal. When Mara bound their hands together with the sacred cord of braided sinew, Era felt Korak's fingers tremble slightly against hers. Whether from anger or some other emotion, she couldn't tell. His face remained impassive, his ice-pale eyes fixed on some point in the distance, as if his spirit were elsewhere. "You are now joined by the law of the people," Mara announced, her voice carrying across the steaming pool where the tribe had gathered. "May your union bring strength, not weakness, life, not death." The traditional blessing sounded hollow in the tense silence that followed. No one cheered. No one stepped forward to congratulate the new couple. Even the children, usually boisterous at any gathering, stood silent and watchful, sensing the adults' discomfort. Ragnar approached last, as was his right as chief and father of the bride. He carried his ceremonial spear of office, tipped with the tooth of a cave bear. Standing before the newly married couple, he drove the butt of the spear into the ground between them. "My daughter goes with you, outcast," he said, his voice pitched to carry to everyone present. "But remember this, she remains of my blood. Any child she bears will be of my line. Any harm that comes to her will be answered by my hand." Korak's eyes finally focused, meeting the chief's gaze directly. "I remember everything, Ragnar," he said quietly. "Every word, every deed, every truth, and every lie." A murmur ran through the gathered tribe. Such directness to the chief was unheard of. Some hands moved to weapons. Tension crackled in the cold air like the prelude to lightning. Ragnar's face darkened. "You were given mercy once, Korak. Do not mistake this marriage for a second offering." Before Korak could respond, Ira stepped forward, placing herself slightly between the two men. "The ceremony is complete, Father," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "By our laws, I am now Korak's wife. We will trouble the tribe no further." For a moment it seemed Ragnar might say more, but instead he turned away, dismissively. "Take your wife and go, outcast. You are permitted to build your dwelling at the eastern edge of the valley, no closer to the main caves than the lightning-struck oak. You may hunt on tribal lands, but must offer the first portion of any large kill to the tribe. You may speak when spoken to. These are my terms." "And if I refuse them?" Korak asked. The chief didn't even turn around. "Then you return to exile alone. My daughter remains with her people, marked as a widow, though not yet a wife. Choose." Ira felt Korak's hand tighten around hers, the cord binding them together, digging into her flesh. His body had gone rigid, and she could sense the rage emanating from him like heat from a fire. For a terrifying moment she thought he might actually refuse, might abandon her to a fate perhaps worse than being an outcast's wife, to be neither maiden nor married, neither daughter nor wife, a woman without status or protection. Then, slowly, his grip relaxed. "I accept your terms, Chief Ragnar," he said, each word precise and controlled. And so began their life together, not with celebration, but with conditional tolerance, not with blessing, but with barely concealed threats. Their dwelling took shape over the next 3 days, a simple lean-to against the base of a cliff, far enough from the tribe to satisfy Ragnar's decree, but close enough to the forest edge for hunting. Korak worked tirelessly, felling young trees with a stone axe, lashing them together with vines, covering the frame with hides he had tanned during his years of solitude. Era gathered moss for bedding, constructed a hearth from river stones, and set snares for rabbits while he worked. They spoke little during those first days. At night, they lay side by side but not touching, the small fire casting their shadows against the hide wall of their shelter. Korak made no move to claim his marital rights, and Era offered no invitation. Both were too wrapped in their own thoughts, their own plans, their own wounds. On the 4th day, as Era returned from gathering herbs near the sacred pool, she found 3 young men from the tribe waiting near her new home. She recognized them as hunters who had once been friends with Korak before his exile. Their presence was unusual. Most of the tribe avoided the outcast dwelling as if it were contaminated. "The chief's daughter reduced to living in a hovel with the bone thief," one called out as she approached. "How far you've fallen, Era." She straightened her back and met his gaze steadily. "I am the wife of Korak now. Address me as such, or not at all." The young men exchanged glances, smirking. The tallest of them, Torek, stepped forward. "We came to see if the outcast was treating you well. Perhaps you need protection." The implication was clear in his tone, in the way his eyes traveled over her body. Era's hand moved to the bone knife at her belt, the one possession her father had not forbidden her to take. "My husband will return soon," she said, injecting confidence into her voice, though she had no idea where Korak had gone that morning. "I suggest you leave before then." Torek laughed. "The outcast doesn't frighten us. He's forgotten how to be a man, living alone all these years. I doubt he even remembers how to please a woman, if he ever knew." The other two chuckled, moving to flank her, cutting off her path to the shelter. Fear flickered in Ara's chest, but she refused to show it. These were men of her tribe, hunters who had taken the oath to protect the people. Surely they wouldn't— "Step away from my wife." Korak's voice came from behind the young men, startling them. He stood at the edge of the clearing, a freshly killed deer slung over his shoulders, blood still dripping from its throat. His face was a mask of controlled fury, his body coiled with tension. Torek recovered quickly, turning to face him. "We were just welcoming your bride to her new home, outcast, making sure she doesn't regret her situation. She is under my protection now," Korak said, dropping the deer carcass to the ground with a heavy thud. "Any man who troubles her answers to me." One of the other hunters snorted. "Your protection? The bone thief who betrayed the ancestors. Who would trust—" Before he could finish, Korak moved so quickly that Era barely saw it happen. In an instant, he had the speaker pinned against a tree, a hunting knife at his throat. "5 years alone in the wild have taught me things the tribe has forgotten," Korak said, his voice eerily calm. "How to kill silently. How to make pain last. How to ensure a body is never found." He pressed the knife just enough to draw a thin line of blood. "Speak of me how you will, but never threaten my wife again." He released the terrified hunter with a shove. All 3 young men backed away, their earlier bravado evaporated. "Ragnar will hear of this," Torek warned, but his voice shook. "Tell him," Korak replied. "Tell him I am exactly what he made me." After they fled, Era and Korak stood in silence, the dead deer between them, its glazed eyes staring at nothing. Finally, Era spoke. "Would you really have killed him?" Korak wiped his knife on his tunic before sheathing it. "Once, I would have said no. Now—" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Survival changes a person, Era. You do what you must." That night, as they prepared the deer meat together, Era studied her husband covertly. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, his knife separating flesh from bone in smooth strokes. There was grace in his movements, precision born of necessity. She wondered what other skills he had honed during his exile, what other changes had occurred beneath his stoic exterior. "Why did you accept this marriage?" she asked suddenly. "You could have refused, returned to your solitude." Korak's hands paused briefly before resuming their work. "Perhaps I was tired of being alone. That's not the reason." He glanced up at her, a flicker of surprise in his pale eyes. "You're more perceptive than your father." "That's not difficult," she replied, a hint of bitterness in her voice. "Why did you really accept?" For a long moment Korak was silent, focusing on his task. Then, without looking up, "I have unfinished business with the tribe, with your father. This marriage changes things." "You seek revenge," she said. It wasn't a question. "I seek justice," he corrected. "There's a difference, though your father never understood that." Ira thought of the small carved bone Mara had pressed into her hand before the wedding, a miniature bear with unusual markings that she had hidden in a pouch around her neck. She had studied it in private, trying to understand its significance, why the elder had risked punishment to give it to her. "What really happened?" she asked. "Why were you exiled?" Korak set down his knife and finally looked at her fully. In the firelight, his face seemed older than his years, carved by hardship and solitude. "Ask your father," he said. "Ask him about the cave of 7 bears. Ask him about the bone that speaks. Ask him what he feared more, sacrilege or truth." Before she could press further, a commotion from the direction of the main camp caught their attention. Voices raised in alarm, the pounding of feet, the distinct call used to summon hunters in emergency. Korak was on his feet instantly, tension radiating from him. "Stay here," he ordered, reaching for his spear. But Era was already rising, grabbing her own knife. "I am not some meek bride to be left behind while men decide my fate," she said firmly. "Whatever threatens the tribe threatens us both." For an instant, something like respect flickered in Korak's eyes. Then he nodded once, curtly. "Stay close to me." Together, they ran toward the camp, toward the shouting that grew louder with each step, toward a crisis that would force long-buried truths into the open and test their fragile alliance in ways neither could have anticipated. They crested the small rise that separated their dwelling from the main encampment and froze at the sight before them. Torches blazed throughout the camp, illuminating a scene of chaos. Warriors from another tribe, at least 20 strong, had surrounded the main cave entrance. Their bodies were painted with unfamiliar symbols, their spears tipped with barbed points, unlike any Era had seen before. They wore necklaces of teeth and bone that clacked together as they moved. The people of the Red Deer were scattered in defensive positions, outnumbered and clearly caught by surprise. Ragnar stood at the center, his ceremonial spear in hand, facing what appeared to be the leader of the invaders. A massive man whose face was covered in ritual scars that formed a pattern like lightning. "After all these seasons," Korak whispered, his voice tight with recognition, "the wolf people have come." Era shot him a questioning glance. "You know them?" "I lived among them for a time during my wanderings beyond the mountains. Before—" He trailed off, his eyes fixed on the confrontation below. "What do they want?" Era asked. Korak's expression hardened. "What was stolen from them? What your father claimed as his own?" Before she could ask more, Ragnar's voice rose above the tense standoff. "We have no quarrel with the wolf people. We have respected the boundaries between our lands for generations." The scarred leader stepped forward, his voice heavily accented but understandable. "Lies. You took what was sacred to us. The speaking bone that tells the story of our ancestors. 5 winters we have searched, and now we know your tribe harbors the thief." A murmur ran through the gathered people of the Red Deer. Confused glances were exchanged. Most of the younger members had no knowledge of what the wolf people's leader spoke of. Ragnar raised his spear defensively. "There is no thief here. Your accusations dishonor both our peoples." "Then you will not object when we search your sacred caves," the leader growled, gesturing to his warriors to advance. "No!" Ragnar shouted, genuine alarm in his voice. "The caves of our ancestors are forbidden to outsiders. It would be sacrilege." The wolf people's leader bared his teeth in what might have been a smile. "Then you admit you hide something." Korak's hand suddenly gripped Era's arm. "I must go down there," he said urgently, "before blood is shed." "What? Why?" Era hissed, confused by the intensity in his eyes. "What do you know about this?" For a moment Korak hesitated, then, "The crime I was accused of, stealing from the sacred cave, desecrating the ancestors' remains, it was a lie. I discovered something your father wanted kept hidden, something that connected our people to the wolf people, something that threatened his authority as chief." Understanding dawned on Era as her fingers touched the small carved bear hanging beneath her tunic. "The bone that speaks." "Yes," Korak nodded grimly. "An ancient record carved on mammoth tusk, showing that our tribes were once one, before a great conflict split them apart. It tells of shared hunting grounds, shared knowledge, shared leadership. And my father hid this truth? Why? Because the bone tells of how leadership should pass, not from father to son or strongest to strongest, but through those marked by the spirits, those with the gift of healing and vision. Korak's eyes met hers meaningfully. People like you, Era. The revelation struck her like a physical blow. Her father's growing resentment over the years, his dismissal of her healing skills, his insistence on traditional power structures, it all made a terrible kind of sense. Below them, the confrontation was escalating. Warriors on both sides had raised their weapons. The Wolf People's leader was advancing on Ragnar, whose face had gone pale with rage or fear. "I have to stop this," Korak said, already moving down the slope. "Stay hidden." "No." Era grabbed his arm, her decision crystallizing in an instant. "We go together. This concerns me as much as you." For a heartbeat, they stared at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then Korak nodded once. Together, they descended into the fire-lit chaos side by side. The tribe noticed them first gasps, and whispers spreading as the outcast and the chief's daughter approached. The wolf people turned to see what had caused the reaction, weapons still raised. "Korak?" The scarred leader's voice held disbelief. "The Wanderer returns." "Tarok," Korak acknowledged with a slight bow. "I see you found what you've been searching for." "The Bone Thief!" someone from Era's tribe shouted. "He led them here." Ragnar's face contorted with fury and fear. "Seize him," he commanded, pointing his spear at Korak. "He conspires with our enemies." Several hunters moved to obey, but Era stepped between them and her husband. "No!" she shouted, her voice ringing with unexpected authority. "Listen first. There has been enough deception." To everyone's surprise, including her own, the advancing hunters hesitated. Tarok studied her curiously. "Who is this woman who defends you, Wanderer?" "My wife," Korak answered simply. "And the rightful leader of this tribe." A shocked silence fell over the gathering. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ragnar's face drained of all color, then flushed with murderous rage. "Blasphemy!" he roared, lunging forward with his spear aimed at Korak's heart. Everything happened at once. Era screamed a warning. Korak twisted aside, the spear grazing his ribs instead of piercing his chest. Tarok and his warriors surged forward. The tribe's hunters closed ranks around their chief. Blood would have flowed freely then, had not an unexpected voice cut through the chaos. "Enough!" Mara, the ancient bone keeper, emerged from the shadows of the cave entrance. In her gnarled hands, she held something long and yellowed with age. A curved tusk covered in intricate carvings, polished by generations of reverent hands. The speaking bone. All motion ceased, all eyes fixed on the sacred object that both tribes had thought lost or hidden. "I have kept this safe," Mara announced, her voice stronger than her frail body would suggest, waiting for the day when truth would matter more than power. That day has come. She raised the bone high, its surface catching the torchlight, the carvings seeming to move and shift like living creatures. This tells the true history of our peoples, once united, then divided. It tells of leaders chosen not by strength alone, but by wisdom and connection to the spirit world. It tells of peace, not conquest. Ragnar stood frozen, his spear still extended, his authority crumbling before everyone's eyes. "You betrayed me, old woman," he whispered hoarsely. "I served the tribe," she corrected him. "As I have always done. As you should have done." She turned to Ira and Korak, holding out the speaking bone. "Come, daughter of visions. Come, wanderer who returns. Take what is rightfully yours to share between our peoples." Ira stepped forward hesitantly, aware of every eye upon her. The bone felt warm against her palm, almost alive. Beside her, Korak placed his hand next to hers, their fingers touching on the ancient surface. In that moment of connection with each other, with the bone, with both tribes watching in stunned silence, something extraordinary happened. The ground beneath their feet trembled. A low rumbling sound filled the air, growing louder with each heartbeat. "Earthquake?" someone shouted in panic. But this was something far worse. High above the camp, weakened by the unusual warmth of recent days, a massive wall of snow and ice had broken free from the mountainside. The avalanche descended with terrifying speed, a white death rushing toward the gathered tribes. Korak saw it first, his exile-sharpened senses detecting the change in air pressure, the subtle shift in sound. "Run!" he bellowed, grabbing Era's arm. "To the high caves! Now!" Terror galvanized the crowd. Ancient enmities forgotten in the face of immediate danger, the wolf people and the people of the red deer scrambled together toward the safety of the upper cliff dwellings. Children were scooped up, elders supported between strong hunters, the injured half carried up the steep path. Era clutched the speaking bone to her chest as she ran alongside Korak, her mind racing. "The sacred pool," she gasped. "The lower caves." "No time," Korak panted, pulling her faster toward the narrow trail that led upward. "We can only save the people now." Behind them, Ragnar stood motionless, watching the white wall approach, his ceremonial spear still in his hand. His face held an expression of strange calm, as if he were greeting an old friend. "Father!" Era screamed, trying to turn back. Korak's grip tightened on her arm. "He's made his choice," he said grimly, continuing to pull her upward. "We must make ours." The last thing Era saw before they reached the shelter of the high cave was her father raising his spear toward the oncoming avalanche, a solitary figure defying the inevitable. Then the world dissolved into a roaring chaos of white, as the mountainside itself seemed to flow like water, burying everything below the camp, the sacred pool, the lower caves, and with them all the certainties that had defined their lives. Inside the cramped safety of the upper cave, people from both tribes huddled together in shocked silence, united by survival, by loss, by the realization that everything had changed in the space of a single heartbeat. Era felt Korak's arm around her shoulders, steadying her as she trembled with grief and horror. The speaking bone remained clutched against her chest, the stories of both their peoples preserved while so much else was lost. "What happens now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the diminishing rumble of the avalanche. Korak looked down at her, then at the mixed crowd of survivors' enemies moments ago, now bound by shared catastrophe. His ice-pale eyes had softened, showing a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "We begin again," he said simply, "together." When spring finally came to the valley, it revealed a landscape transformed. The avalanche had reshaped the lower slopes, buried the old camp beneath tons of rock and debris, and forever altered the course of the river that had sustained the people of the Red Deer for countless generations. But it had not buried everything. Era stood at the edge of the sacred pool which had somehow survived the devastation, its warm waters still bubbling up from deep within the earth. Steam rose into the cool morning air, creating a veil between worlds, just as the elders had always taught. She knelt and dipped her fingers into the mineral-rich water, feeling its warmth travel up her arm and into her heart. Nearby, Korak supervised a group of young hunters, some from the wolf people, some from her own tribe as they constructed a new dwelling. In the 3 moons since the avalanche, the survivors had formed an uneasy but functional alliance. Old hatreds didn't disappear overnight, but shared grief and the struggle for survival had created bonds that would have seemed impossible before. "They're working well together," Mara observed, joining Era by the pool. The ancient bonekeeper had survived the catastrophe, though many other elders had not. Her knowledge had proven invaluable in the difficult days that followed. Yes, Era agreed, watching as Korak demonstrated a new technique for lashing support beams together. He has a gift for teaching, for bringing out the best in others. As do you, Mara said, nodding toward a group of women gathered near the new medicine lodge, where Era had established her healing practice. You've united the wisdom traditions of both tribes, something I never thought I'd live to see. Era smiled faintly. We had no choice but to learn from each other. One tribe's plants couldn't heal all our wounds. One tribe's hunting methods couldn't feed all our people. There is always a choice, Mara corrected gently. Your father made his. Era's smile faded. They had found Ragnar's body when the snow finally melted enough to safely search the lower valley. He had died as he had lived, standing his ground, defiant to the last. They had buried him with the honor due a chief, both tribes participating in the ceremony, recognizing the complicated truth that even flawed leaders deserve respect in death. I still don't understand why, Era said, her fingers absently touching the small carved bear she still wore around her neck. Why hide the truth? Why fear the connection between our peoples so much? Mara sighed, her ancient eyes gazing into the misty distance. Power, once tasted, is not easily surrendered. The speaking bone threatened everything he believed about his right to lead, about the natural order of things. She turned to look directly at Era, and perhaps he saw in you what he feared most, someone stronger than himself, in all the ways that truly matter. Before Era could respond, a child's voice called out excitedly from the nearby trees. They're coming! The scouts are returning! Activity throughout the camp paused as everyone turned to watch the hunting party emerge from the forest edge. They moved with the measured pace of those bearing good news, spears held high in triumph. Korak broke away from his construction project and came to stand beside Era, his hand finding hers with the easy familiarity that had developed between them over the difficult winter. What had begun as an arranged humiliation had transformed, gradually and unexpectedly, into something neither of them had dared hope for. A partnership of equals, built on respect and growing affection. They found it, he said quietly, reading the signals in the returning hunter's posture. Era squeezed his hand. You were right. The scouts approached the gathered crowd, led by Tarok, the scarred leader of the wolf people who now served as joint chief alongside Korak in their new combined tribe. Beyond the eastern ridge, Tarok announced, his deep voice carrying across the attentive gathering. A new valley opens, rich hunting grounds, sheltered caves, room for all our people to thrive. He grinned, the expression transforming his fierce face. And mammoth, many mammoth. A cheer rose from the assembled tribe members. After months of uncertainty, of stretching dwindling supplies, of wondering if they could survive in this changed landscape, here at last was hope. A new beginning. Later that evening, as fires burned brightly throughout the camp and the celebration continued around them, Era and Korak slipped away to the sacred pool. In the gathering darkness, the steam created ghostly shapes above the water's surface, dancing and twisting like spirits from the other world. They sat side by side on a flat rock overlooking the pool, shoulders touching, sharing comfortable silence. The speaking bone lay across their laps, its carvings illuminated by the rising moon. They had studied it together throughout the winter, learning the ancient stories, understanding the connections that had been deliberately forgotten. I've been thinking, Korak said finally, his voice low and thoughtful, about why your father really arranged our marriage. Era turned to look at him, her eyebrow raised questioningly. He told himself it was punishment, Korak continued, his finger tracing one of the spiraling patterns on the bone. For both of us. But I wonder if deep down he knew what would happen. If some part of him recognized that together, we might accomplish what neither could alone. You think he foresaw this? Era gestured toward the bustling camp below, where former enemies now shared food and stories around common fires. Our tribes united? A new future? Korak shook his head slowly. Not consciously, but perhaps the wisdom of the ancestors worked through him, despite himself. The speaking bone tells us that the two tribes were meant to be one, that only together could they survive the changing world. Era considered this, remembering her father's face in their last moments, the strange calm, the acceptance. Had there been something else there too? A knowledge that his time had passed? That the future belonged to a different kind of strength than his? We'll never know, she said finally. But I choose to believe that some part of him wanted this, wanted me to find my true path, even if it wasn't the one he had planned. Korak's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer against the evening chill. And have you? Found your path? Era leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the solid warmth of his body next to hers. Below them, the merged tribe continued their celebrations, their voices rising in songs that combined traditions, creating something new and beautiful from what had once been separate. I think, she said softly, her hand coming to rest on her belly, where new life had just begun to grow. A child who would know nothing of the old hatreds, who would be born into a world where boundaries had been redrawn by catastrophe and courage. We're creating that path together, step by step. Korak's hand covered hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. No words were needed in that moment of perfect understanding. Two souls who had been cast out, who had suffered, who had questioned, now finding in each other the belonging they had always sought. Above them, the stars emerged one by one, ancient and unchanging, yet witnessing a world in constant transformation. The same stars that had watched over the first humans to walk upright, to create fire, to tell stories. The same stars that would watch over their child and their children's children as they forged a new way of being in this unforgiving but beautiful world. In the sacred pool below, the mist continued to dance, connecting past to future, earth to sky, ending to beginning, an eternal cycle of destruction and renewal that had shaped humanity since the first dawn and would continue long after the last fire went out. But tonight, in this moment between what had been lost and what might yet be found, there was only this two people who had been joined as punishment and discovered, against all odds, that together they could create something the ancestors themselves would recognize as sacred, a love that healed ancient wounds, a strength born of shared vulnerability, a tribe founded not on blood or tradition alone, but on the revolutionary idea that differences, when respected rather than feared, could forge a future greater than any single vision could encompass. And perhaps that was the true message of the speaking bone all along.